All of us have expectations in life. We all have things that we expect to, experience in this life. We expect that we're going to live a long life as long as we take care of ourselves and we're healthy and we eat right and exercise periodically and, all of those types of things. We expect to live a long life. We have expectations for various opportunities in our life, whether it's job related or it's with people or it's with relationships or maybe it's just education. We have expectations that these things will be there for us, that those things will serve us and serve our own individual needs. We have expectations that well, as far as our governments and those agencies and our local and federal and state and so forth, we have expectations that they're going to provide security for us, that they're going to provide services that are healthy for our communities and so forth. We have expectations when it comes to families. We expect that we would be a unified family, that we'd all get together and we'd respect each other and we'd value each other and we'd love each other. And of course, in the world today, the larger family of people, we're crying out that we would love each other and value each other and respect each other in who they are. Those are things that we expect. But the reality is many things will be expected, but some things will not. When you think about it, this pandemic, the COVID 19, when you think about it, George Floyd and all of the issues surrounding his death and the Black Lives Matter and all the rioting and all of those things, we have expectations, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we can predict the future. Doesn't mean that those things are going to take place. And it doesn't mean that we're going to know what's coming around the corner. It's just not the case. I remember when I first went to college, I graduated from high school on a 5-year program and I went to college. I went to Montgomery College in Rockville, Maryland, and I kind of thought I knew what I wanted to do and all of that good stuff. And I expected at that time to do well in school. Well, I did not. The dog in this picture is waiting on his master to come home, as he has day after day, week after week, month after month. The owner comes in and pets him and they play together and he gets treats and all that wonderful stuff. But what happens if something happens to that owner that day and he can't come home? I'm going to talk to you today about a guy by the name of Job. This is a guy that was living a very, very blessed life, just like this family you see here on the screen. They were living the dream, man. They were doing well and they had health and they had finances and they had, large family. And Job had, all of this stuff. He was blessed in everything he did. And he was a good man. He loved God, he respected God, and he did his absolute best to live for who God is. And because of the way that Job lived, he also was, I should say, expecting that God would continue the blessings in his life. I mean, Job gave God all the credit for all of the wondrous things and the blessings that took place in his life. And he associated those with his activities and his actions for God and living for God and praying and sacrificing and all of those things. And he expected all of those things to continue to take place. Well, unfortunately, it didn't. I'm going to take you to a series, or I should say, a story in the Bible that talks about this interaction between God and one of his creations, uh, namely Satan. You see, in this conversation that they're going to, or that they're having, Satan, he really assails God's wisdom and the way God runs the universe. And Satan tells God, he challenges him and says, the only reason that they honor you and serve you and worship you is because of all the stuff you give them. It's because you continually bless them. What he's saying is that their obedience to God isn't really a free choice. He's saying it's kind of like Pavlov's dog. You give them a treat when they roll over, and that's the activity. They're going to, whenever they want to be blessed by God, they're going to do something that will please God, and now God owes them something, and it's just it just doesn't make any sense. Satan was telling God that there are only self-serving bargains made out there, and that obedience for the sake of being protected was exactly what they were doing. Now, God could have told Satan, I'm God, I made you, I don't really care what you think. You can go about thinking whatever you want, whatever, it doesn't make any difference to me. He could have just silenced him at that point, and that would have been the end of it. But really, if God had done that, then the issue would still be on the table. One day, when the angels had gathered around the Lord, and with them the Lord asked, Satan, where have you been? Where have you been? Hang on just a second, guys. I want to fix something here on the screen. Technology is great when it works. Satan, where have you been? And Satan replied, I've been going all over the earth. Then the Lord asked, what do you think of my servant Job? No one on earth is like him. He is truly a good person who respects me and refuses to do evil. Well, why shouldn't he respect you? Satan remarked. You're like a wall protecting not only him, but his entire family and all of his property. You make him successful in whatever he does, and his flocks and his herds, they grow regardless of where they are. Try taking everything he owns, and he will curse you to your face. The Lord replied, and here God is answering this challenge to the character, the integrity of God. The Lord replies, all right, Satan, you do what you want with anything that belongs to him, but don't harm Job. So then Satan leaves. Now, let's analyze this a little bit, guys. At at first light, this almost looks like one of these barroom challenges, where you're sitting there with someone, well, I bet I could do this, and you bet no, you can't do that, or so and so does something only because, and okay, how much you want to bet on it? Well, they're not betting, it's not a barroom situation here, but God's integrity and his character and who he is actually being challenged on the line. It's it's quite an unusual thing that Satan would be allowed to challenge God up there in the kingdom of heaven. But God allows it. But it brings up a lot of questions. Is it fair that this man Job should be used like a pawn on a chessboard? Okay, so the story continues. Job's sons and daughters were having a feast in the home of his oldest son, when someone rushed up to Job and said, while your servants were eating and drinking, all of a sudden they were plowing and with your oxen and your donkeys, and they were eating grass, and a gang of Sabaeans attacked and stole the ox and the donkeys. And your other servants were killed, and I was the only one that escaped to tell you. And while that servant was still speaking, when a second one came running up, saying, God sent down a fire that killed your sheep and your servants, and I'm the only one who escaped to tell you. And before that servant finished speaking, a third one raced up and said, the gang of Chaldeans attacked and stole your camels, and all of your other servants were killed. And I'm the only one that escaped to tell you. And while that servant was speaking, a fourth one dashed up and said, your children were having a feast. Now we're talking about family. Your children were having a feast and drinking wine at the home of your oldest son, when suddenly a windstorm blew in from the desert, blew the house down, and crushed all of your children. I'm the only one who escaped to tell you. Well, just the order of events here is something that makes you wonder. I mean, it's obviously very well orchestrated, but it brings up a lot of questions. Why in the world would God allow this? Why would God allow all of these people to die for the sake of this challenge? What if this was my family? What if this was your family? You know, Job was expecting life to continue as it always had, to love God and to be blessed. But he insisted instead, during this time of loss, he was frustrated and he had to cry out to God and to reveal the pain that he was feeling, knowing that it was totally undeserved. And Job starts to question what it is that's going on. Remember, he was expecting peace and got war. He was expecting life, got death. He was expecting an increase in his wealth, and instead it all went down the tubes and poverty hit like it had never hit before. He expected and he experienced very devastating times and a very devastating illness. Now, if God is always right and God is perfect in wisdom and love, how in the world could he have allowed this to take place in Job's life? We don't have all the answers, guys. We do not have all the answers. And contrary to what a lot of people believe, the scriptures don't always tell us everything, and that is very intentional. But what is important here is what happened to Job's expectations, as well as how did he respond to this situation? What did he do? How did he respond to it? Well, tragedy rather than blessing became the mantra of Job's life. He went from having it all to having nothing. Is it fair not to receive what you have expected and worked toward in your life? Was it fair of God to allow all of this to take place? Was it fair that so many had to die just to prove this one point or this one issue? And what kind of good could actually come out of it? You know, I see this played out a lot in life today. I see people that live good, wholesome Christian lives, and then, somebody in their family that's dearly loved, that they die early, or they die, in a way that's just horrible. There's tremendous pain there. You try your best to teach your family to love God and to believe in the God that you've placed all of your hope and your faith in, but they choose to rebel and they go down very destructive paths. We don't always get the things that we expect. We don't always get the things that we want. Now, in this story, when Job heard all of these things, he tore his clothes because of his great sorrow. It says he knelt on the ground and then worshiped God and said, "We bring nothing at birth, we take nothing with us at death. The Lord alone gives and takes. Praise the name of the Lord." But one of the things we're going to learn is Job's theology about God. Even though Job was a tremendous man, a very God fearing, loving man, his theology was wrong. This guy that God says to Satan, have you considered my man Job down there? There's no one in the earth, there's no one walking the planet like him. And yet, even this guy Job has a theology that needs some correction. Because just because you live for God and you do certain things doesn't mean that your expectations of God will always be fulfilled in the way that you want or that you expect them to be. It doesn't mean that God doesn't bless. It doesn't mean that God doesn't do things for people out of his own nature, his loving nature, and for as a reward many times for doing our best to love and serve him. It's just that so many people, and I run into this as a pastor, so many people um, become disappointed or disillusioned with God because things didn't play out the way that they expected it. So they get angry with God and they turn away from God, or they look toward God and say, "Well, if that's the way God is, I don't want nothing to do with it." You see, we need to remember this thing that Job said. You know, you come into the world with nothing and you're going out with nothing. And the bottom line is God is going to do the good things that he will do. But even when they don't look good, you got to trust him. You gotta